Hi, I'm Jonathan Bojarski, founder of Saxophonisto.com. Welcome to this special Mummer String Band edition of the series, where I talk with some of the creative minds who have helped to shape that distinctive string band sound into what it is today. Many of these folks are personal heroes of mine, immensely talented individuals who often work behind the scenes to create the incredible productions showcased at the annual Mummers Parade in Philadelphia. In today's interview, I have the pleasure of speaking with John Gilbert. John is a truly inspiring, multi-talented legend who is one of the key individuals behind the early Ferko string band sound and many of its award-winning presentations from the 1960s and 1970s. John first marched up the street with Ferko in 1948, and he began arranging music for the band in 1964, taking over as the band's New Year's Day arranger in 1969. John's arrangements are legendary and include many Ferko classics such as Honest and Truly, Where Are You Dreamgirl, and Whispering. John also served as drill master for Ferko from 1966 to 1976 and set the standard for many drill masters who followed, both in Ferko and in others. John is not only a multi-talented musician and creative mind, but also a master mummers historian with a vast repository of knowledge. In this comprehensive interview, we explore many facets of both Ferko and mummer history in general, including looking at the early days of the Ferko string band. I thought I knew a thing or two about Ferko history before talking with John. I left this interview utterly amazed by the rich and storied history of this extraordinary organization. We talked about Ferko's prolific recording history, including recording of the many 78 and 45 RPM records of the 1940s and 1950s. Most notably, the 1955 recording of Alabama Jubilee, which reached the position of 14 on the national Billboard charts and also became a top seller in England. John incidentally performed on all those recordings. We discuss Ferko's early music directors and arrangers and really zero in on how the classic Ferko sound came about. John reminisces about his appearances with the band on the Jackie Gleason show on Valentine's Day 1953 and on the game show I've Got a Secret in 1963. We also really get under the hood with regard to history of the string band show of shows. John took me down so many rabbit holes of fascinating mummer history. It was really a truly amazing journey. Incidentally, delving into Ferko's history led me to revisit this fascinating book by Dave Bradshaw and Tom Frangisetto. Joe's Boys provides a very extensive history of the band, and I highly recommend picking up a copy if you're interested in this sort of thing. It is so easy nowadays to overlook and at times forget the amazing history of the Ferko string band and mummers in general. John Gilbert brings this right back into focus. I have to give a shout out to Anthony Salenza for connecting me with John. Without Anthony's help, this interview would not have been possible. In closing, I'd like to read an excerpt from an article penned in 1991 by Frank Conforti for the Review Chronicle. In it he writes, "From 1948 to 1976, John Gilbert was a majestic figure among the talents that shaped the string band ranks. He possessed talent both in the music and presentation categories. When he stood in front of the Ferko string band, not only prizes were awarded, but an air of elegance and showmanship were carved. Gilbert projected a self-control that captivated his audience. A man of deep personal convictions, he never sought the limelight and accepted accolades with humility. No matter what the theme, when the Ferko band arrived, there was the spell of John Gilbert, totally in control, like a hypnotist preparing to captivate us. When Gilbert ended his first-class career in 1976, he left a trail of excellence, one that still remains today." John never met the author of this article, but that's the impact that John has had on others who have seen him in action. For those of you who don't know John, you'll no doubt learn a bit about this extraordinary individual, and I hope you enjoy what follows. Well, I am so excited to have John Gilbert with me today. John is a legend in the Mummer String Band community. He was one of the early music directors of the Ferko String Band, one of its earliest and greatest arrangers, and really one of the brains behind the Ferko Sound. When we think of that wonderful Ferko sound from the 60s and 70s, many of those arrangements that we're hearing, those are John Gilbert's arrangements. John's with me today right now to talk with me a little bit about his history, his wonderful history with mummery, his history with music. And boy, it's an honor to talk with you, John. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
John, tell me a little bit about how you got just your upbringing, where you grew up, and your family, and how you got into music.
Well, I lived in Philadelphia when I was born, and moved from Philadelphia when I was 9 years old. We moved into the surrounding county, and I'm the youngest of 7 children. Most of them played an instrument of sorts. Some didn't go too far with it, and others went, like myself, went much farther. Of course, we were from the pre-TV era, so we had to play at home and just play together, as is, maybe 3 or 4 of us together and play music, and it was always part of the household. So.
Were your parents musicians as well?
No, neither one of them could play anything. So, but we had fun. One brother played the piano, and our sisters liked country and western. One played guitar, and the other played mandolin. They would sing, and the 4 of us mainly active with the music. The others were married and off at that particular time. What got me started with string bands was that one picture I sent to you of Ferko in 1942 with the musical Ferko's Braided Jewel. I'm sorry, that was the thing. We still lived in Philadelphia at that time, and I had just a little bit past my 9th birthday, and my mother said, let's go down and watch the string bands. So we were within walking distance of the Broad Street subway. We got on the subway, got off at Girard Avenue. In fact, that's close by where that picture was taken that I showed you. And I saw that band, and I said, that's the band I want to play for. I didn't play anything at that time. 5 years later, I was in the band. I don't know why they ever accepted me to this day. I couldn't sight read. I had a set of bells that my sister bought for me in October before I went to Ferko. Couldn't play them very well, but they gave me a chance. And I did everything I could to improve my skills so I could stay with the band.
Did you start on piano when you were learning music initially?
My music training was 1 piano lesson, and anything beyond that, I picked up myself.
Wow, that's remarkable.
And I just had a good ear. I could hear the music the string bands played. I could hear a song played 1 time, and I could play it.
Wow.
And the gentleman that I played bells in Ferko with, Funky Beverly, was kind of the band clown, but he was a good musician. He was a very good bell player. And we played together for about 13 years. And he was 10 years older than I. He was a World War II veteran. And we played together, and we got along fine. And when I got into the leadership part of the band, he was one of the biggest supporters that I had. And anything I ever asked him, never questioned it. He did it. He was a great supporter. We really got along well.
So what was your first year up the street with Ferko?
1948. And what a time to join Ferko. Bob Traub was music director, and Bob was kind of an unsung hero with the band. He picked up that job because so many guys were in the service. just digress a little bit here. In 1945, Ferko had 53 men on Broad Street. They had 50 men in the service. And that hit every band there. And just to show you an example of I don't know how the bands really survived through the war, but they managed to do it. And all of them, not all, there weren't that many. There was only, they actually dropped down to 11 bands. But for them to keep that parade going, and I guess a lot of guys come out of retirement. But Bunky Beverly was one of the guys who was in service during World War II. And that's how Bob Traub moved into the music director's job. And Bob's arrangements were very good. They weren't fancy, but they were very good. But Bob was a big barbershop quartet man. And he arranged his music like he would arrange something for a barbershop quartet.
Would you say that Bob was one of the original sort of founders of the Ferko sound?
I would think he is probably the original of the Ferko sound. He did a heck of a job because from 1947 to 1954, Ferko finished either first or second. That's a heck of a run, 8-year run, being in the top 2 bands. He arranged well for the band. Then after 55, he was starting to get up in age, and the band made a change. That's when Bill Connors came on the picture.
Okay, so Bob stepped aside around 1955.
The band was kind of clamoring for a change, and I think Bob sensed it. And he didn't go out on a sour note, and he became the backup for Bill Connors if needed, and so forth. But Bill Connors was the most dramatic music director that Ferko had in my years with the band.
How so?
He was just, he could get shading on a number, and the guys just, you could sense what he wanted by looking at his eyes. He was just a dramatic director. He would probably be, for a string band version of the conductor of the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra or something like that.
Wow.
That's just how he was. And he did a fantastic job when he was music director.
Now, would you say that the Ferko, Ferko has that reputation for being very disciplined? Was that the case in the late 1940s and early 1950s? Did it have that reputation then as well, or is this something that came later?
Yeah. Can I talk about Joe Ferko for a minute?
Please.
There's one of the men that I have the highest regards for, of the people that I met in my lifetime. Joe was a wonderful individual, a very humble man. If you were to meet him, you never think he was the same guy strutting out in front of the Ferko band so gracefully that he did for so many years. And he had a heart of gold. And he was a pharmacist by trade. He had his own drugstore, and we used to rehearse on the third floor of the drugstore. His motto was, "A good reputation is worth more than gold." And he had that for his business and his own personal life and for the band. He owned the band. He picked the officers. He selected the officers. And then he stepped aside. He never got involved. He was just the captain of the band. He never overrode anything an officer would put into motion. And they had his confidence, and he let them go. And he was just a wonderful person. He was in his drugstore was in probably a working man's area. People didn't have a lot of money, and a lot of them struggled through the Depression. They come into the drugstore, they needed a prescription, and couldn't pay for it. They went home with the prescription. He was that kind of a guy. He never charged them.
Wow.
And he was a fantastic individual.
Was he a musician too?
No. That's why he was captain of the band. He was the only kid in the neighborhood who couldn't play an instrument. So they made him captain. He actually worked in the drugstore for John Fralinger, who was the father of the John Fralinger you would have known about. And that's where, and I think John Fralinger probably sent him to pharmacy school. And then Joe opened up his own business later. So.
Tell me a little bit more about Curly Connors. How did he run rehearsals? Tell me a little bit more about Curly.
Okay.
Connors.
Yeah, Curly, most people know him as Curly Connors, you're right. He was a late draftee into World War II. And he was back home, I guess, for the 46th parade. And he could have probably been the music director, but since Bob Traub was there, Curly just took the back seat. And he was very well respected in the band. And when Curly Connors said something, everybody listened. People respected him so much. And that wasn't just Ferko. He was well respected in most of the other bands. They all knew him.
What was his instrument?
He played a saxophone.
Okay.
He played a tenor when I first got in the band, but then as he got older, he switched over to the alto. And then after a period of time, he couldn't play it anymore, so he moved up front. In fact, the first year I was drill master, Bill Connors marched to my right. He was up front with me, and another gentleman, Axel Lynn, was to my left. We were together, the three of us up front, for about from 1966 to 76.
Wow.
So the three of us were up there together. Well, 75, I'm sorry. 76, Bill Connors played the fife in our Spirit of 76 theme. And Axel had retired at that point. Axel, and he was president of the band at one time, and a good accordion player, had been a Ferko man for most of his adult years. So.
Did Bill Connors kind of take you under his wing a little bit? Did he see that you had potential for being a future leader in the group?
It was kind of funny how I got into that position. But Bill Connors and I, even though he was old enough to be my father, we had a lot in common because we were the two historians of the band. Had a lot of interest in that respect, and the mummers. And Bill Connors, I know, talked to other bands and said, "Why don't you write about your band? Why don't you have a story to tell? Why don't you tell it?" But nobody else would ever do it. And he and I would get together and talk about different things in the band and aspects of it. But there was a period of time there where both Ed Wolfe, the music director, and after Bill Connors had stepped down, he took the assistant's job. And we played a lot of jobs up in New England. And neither Ed or Bill Connors could get there because of their work. And I wound up directing the band more than the directors did for 1 year there. I was the guy they fell back on, even though I didn't have the title. I was okay. Anything to help the band. That's why we were there.
How old were you then, John?
I would have been about 30, I guess.
Okay.
At that point.
And tell me a little bit more about Ed Wolfe.
Ed Wolfe was a very good musician. His primary instrument was trumpet. He's the one that's played the trumpet on those recordings that I sent you.
Yes.
Played the alto sax in the band, the lead sax. Excellent saxophone player. A good director. He knew music, but he didn't quite have the feel for direction that Bill Connors did. Although Ed did a good job. I'm not saying that, but he just didn't have. Nobody had that feeling that Bill Connors could put across as when he directed the band. He was just fantastic at that.
When did Ed take over so Bill Connors was music director from when until when? And then
he had the title from the spring of '55 up until convention, right after Convention Hall in 1961, which would have been February. And he stepped down at the same time as Jim Keenan stepped down as drum master. And that was a pretty good jolt to the band because we didn't expect that.
What was the reason for that?
I never heard the reason that Jim Keenan left, but I knew Bill Connors was getting to be too much for him, the responsibility, and he just wanted to back off. Jim Keenan, I don't know that anybody knows why he left. It was kind of an unknown, and he was a very dynamic drill master. He made the drill master what they were in string bands before he took over that job with Ferko, where he was out front and gave the signal to march. He became the poster boy of drill masters, and he was very, very good. when Jim Keenan and Bill Connors were in charge of the band, it was, I would say, the best run in all the years that I was there. They were both very good. And speaking of that time period, 1951, if I can.
Please.
I don't know who made this change. I never found out, but we used to have the saxophones in the band. They were kind of scattered around. And we had a big costume in 1950. It was, I think, one of the most beautiful of all the old costumes. It was My Lady's Fan. And we won first prize. And then at 51, we were taken out a cowboy costume. And all we had was a hat, a shirt, and a pair of pants, the trousers, cowboy. And they were made up in bright fluorescent satin. Fluorescent satin was just coming into the picture at that particular time.
Oh.
And it was different color combinations. There was about 6 of them. And I don't know who came up with this change, but we marched up the street. Instead of marching up 6 abreast, we went up 10 abreast. We had all strings across the front, and it pushed all the saxophones up into the first and second lines. And starting from the outside in was lead, tenor, third, and then the baritone was got in the third line. Pushed all the music out front. Pushed all the horns out front. And we stunned them with first prize.
Wow.
And the judges that year were from the Ted Mack Amateur Hour program. They had professional judges. And they the rest of the bands didn't know what to make of it. We come up with this small suit. But I think one of the things I noticed with the judging was the first 8 prize winners, all the costumes were character costumes. We were cowboys. Second prize was an Indian. Third prize was pirates. It was Durning, and it had a small suit very similar to ours and was fluorescent satin. From that time on, Ferko's lineups were basically the same. It was the same.
With the 10 across.
10 across and the horns in the second and third line, and it made a difference.
As long as we're talking about that, can you tell me a little bit about the actual instrumentation of the string bands in the late 40s and early 50s? What was the proportion of saxophones to banjos? How many bass saxophones were there? What kind of instrumentation did you have around that time?
Okay, in 1948, my first year, we had 64 players in line. We had 12 saxophones.
Wow.
I had about 7 accordions and 1 bass fiddle, 1 bass sax, and the rest were strings.
Wow.
We had as many banjo mandolins as we had banjos. The banjo mandolin was a very important instrument in the early days of string bands. They, along with violins, were the melody instruments of a string band. I thought it was very interesting when I had to do some research for that book that I sent you for the old prizes years back, and the newspaper descriptions of the parade were fantastic. These guys went into detail about the costumes and the music. And this one writer was talking about a band that was coming up the street, and he said this hush came over the crowd so they could hear the band playing. It was a 120-piece band they had.
Wow.
They were basically the string instruments and maybe a couple of saxophones, and that would be it.
The saxophones were playing kind of a barbershop harmony at that point, or were they playing all unison at that point?
Basically the same thing as when I arranged, when I started arranging. It was a follow-up of what the band was. To me, it was the lilting sound of the Ferko string band, and that's what I wanted to stay with, and I hoped everybody else would stay with.
And these banjo mandolins, so they were actually used for melody. Was
Yes.
it chord melody that they were playing, or were they plucking melody?
Plucking melody.
Okay.
They played, and then of course we had at one time we had 4 violins out front, and they used to work at bowing together, so the bows were going up and down together, and they really worked at it.
Wow.
The front line and made a very good impression.
So tell me how the band instrumentation changed then through the 50s and into the 60s.
Well, in the 50s, we start getting more saxes. Banjo mandolins were fading out. I think we were the last, well, maybe not, but we were one of the last to even have a banjo mandolin in the band. And guitars were fading out also.
3-part harmony in the saxes plus bass, is that kind of how it tended to be?
Harmony and the baritone. The baritone, the first guy to play the baritone in the band was an excellent musician, and we were playing a job, and there was another orchestra at the same place, and they kind of stepped aside, and we took the stage and played. And this one gentleman from the orchestra went up to Bob Traub and says, "Who writes that baritone part that man's playing?" And he says, "That's really something else." The guy says, "Nobody writes that part. He plays that on his own." And he was fantastic. The only downside was he may not get the same thing every time he played it, but every time he played it, it blended in with what the band was doing. But he was just that good of a musician. And then they started writing the baritone parts, and the baritone became a very important part of Ferko's music.
So who would you say was responsible for starting to write that in the arrangements, the moving baritone part? Was that Bill Connors, or who started doing that?
I would think it was probably Billy James, who was a paid arranger we used.
Okay, he was just an outside arranger?
Yes, he was a professional. I don't know who it was, but I think it was connected with some big time musical artist. But I couldn't tell you who it is. Billy James, when I listened to the music that Billy James arranged for Ferko, I listened to the bass parts. He wrote the best bass parts I've ever heard. They are just fantastic.
Was he Ray Malek, I think, mentioned that Ferko had a vaudeville arranger. Do you think he was a vaudeville guy?
Could have been. It could have been. I only met Billy James once, and that's the first year I was drill master, and I had nothing to do with the music at that time. I had arranged a few numbers for the band, but nothing that we did anything like for New Year's, nothing like that. And we were getting ready for Convention Hall, and Eddie Wolfe said, "I got a call from Billy James. He'd like us to come over to the house. He has a number he thinks we might like to use to make our entrance show at the Convention Hall show." So I went over to Billy James' place, and we were Ed Wolfe, Bill Connors, and myself. And Billy James was playing a number on the piano. He said, "Yeah, that's pretty good. Do the arrangement for us." So he was arranging that number, and he was writing the baritone part of the sax, and he had a heart attack and fell over the table, and he was gone.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, so we never got to play that number because he had never finished it.
Oh wow!
So then we were kind of stuck for arranger. Lenny Rosen. This is getting ahead of the story, your Lenny Rosen story, but it just fits into the Billy James part. Lenny wanted us to make a couple of records. One was the John Philip Sousa, which Billy James did all the arranging for that. And then he wanted us to do a Oscar-themed album for Ferko.
What years were those, John? What years?
That would have been around 1966, somewhere like that. And he came up with another arranger called Vince Salvino. And Vince did some music, but then he dropped that. It wasn't working out too well. So since Billy James had died, we hired Vince Salvino to arrange for us. He did the music for 67 and 68. And some of the guys didn't like the harmony. It was a different type of harmony, completely different type. And I had started to do some arrangements, and the guys in the band liked them. They went to Eddie Wolfe and said, "Hey, why don't you get John to do the New Year's music?" Vince Salvino just doesn't have the body to it. He didn't like a baritone sax, and he wouldn't write a part for it. He wrote that melody.
Oh, wow.
The guys weren't happy with it, so then Eddie says to me, "How are we doing it?" I said, "Eddie, you know," so I've arranged, but you know, to take one doing the music for Ferko with Wall Street, that's another story. You know, well, the guys want you to do it. So, all right, okay. Well, I guess it worked out with one first prize, but
what was the first year you wrote for Ferko for the routine?
for New Year's was 1969, Follies on Review. And the one number that Axel Len came up with, he liked, and I actually put the number up, was "I Love You." It was from the Hogan's Hero, the movie, where the guy was with the broom or the mop or something. And we played that. We did Caroline in the Morning, and Row, Row, Row was our going away number. But we had missed first prize 2 years in a row, and we were determined that third year we were going to really go after it. And the band was fired up like you wouldn't believe on New Year's Day.
John, I want to go back a little bit before we go too far ahead. And what was the first arrangement you wrote? Do you remember?
Well, I'll tell you how I wound up arranging. We had the singer on the Joe Pastor. Joe Pastor was a very good sax player, and he used to sing when we did a sit-down concert. We put him up there on a number. And there was another guy in the band that Joe and I were pretty good friends, and this other guy too. And Joe and I were both bachelors, and so Pete and his wife Barbara, they'd invite us over to the house and for dinner, and then afterwards Barbara played the piano and Pete get his banjo out, and Joe would sing. And Joe was singing all these Eddie Cantor numbers, and the reason he knew them was he worked for one of the downtown theaters, big downtown theaters, what they called a Barker. But in those days, they had lines outside waiting to get into the theater. And he'd go out there and say, "Have your tickets ready," and all that kind of stuff. And once the movie started, he stood in the back and he learned all the Eddie Cantor songs. So he was singing those. So I thought, I'll try arranging one. And I arranged Josephine, Please Don't Lean on a Bell.
Okay.
And Joe.
When was that, John? What year was that when you did that?
Have been that probably would have been around 64 or something like that. 64. Okay. And then I did Row, 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 and How You Gonna Keep Them Down on the Farm. And he would sing those. And then the band got to playing the Josephine thing, and he did a fantastic job because he could speak Italian, and that talking part, he could put the Italian accent in on there, and he just had a good time with it. He was a very outgoing, pleasing guy and handsome guy, and everybody loved him. And he was a real asset to the band as a vocalist.
Sounds like he was a real good guy to have around, and a talented one at that.
To have around, and that's how it started, and that's how I wound up so many of the Eddie Cantor songs, that we started with, and then I went into other things.
So at this time, Ed Wolfe was the music director of Ferko.
Yeah,
and you were just bringing around some arrangements.
Or something, and we might put it in the concert book or something like that. I had a few numbers in the concert book, but
okay.
For tactical music, New Year's music.
But before we get too far ahead, I want to go back and I want to play something. One thing I was struck by was the wonderful sound of this 45 RPM you sent me. Give me a second to cue this up. This is from a late 40s 78 RPM. And
Okay.
I was struck by the sound of this wonderful alto saxophone on If You Knew Susie.
That's Bud Bittner, and he's the guy that played the baritone I was telling you about.
I love that. I had that on. It gave me the biggest smile when I was driving home. I had that on my car stereo. I was like, wow, that sounds right out of the vaudeville era. And what a wonderful tone and what a wonderful solo. Okay, so he was the Barry player who
That's
had those great lines. Wonderful, wonderful. I was just wonderful. I didn't want to get too far ahead because there were some great things here, and I wanted to just catch those before too much time went by. All right, so we were talking about how you started writing some songs. You were doing some arrangements, bringing around. Ed Wolfe was the music director, and then by 1969, the band asked you to write the routine.
Correct.
So what happened there?
I just tackled it. We were successful with it. I can't give you anything more than that.
Nothing better than coming right out of the gate with the first prize, huh?
You know, that's the same thing happened to Bill Tobias. The first year he did Ferko's music for Broad Street, first prize.
Yep.
1974. Fantastic job he did. But can we go back to talk about the Gleason show?
Oh, please, yes. Before we get too far ahead, yes, let's do that.
Well, Jackie Gleason had been Grand Master of the Macy's Parade Thanksgiving Day in 1952. And he sold the band, and he wanted the band for his show. So we got a letter, and it was right after New Year's, that Gleason wants us for Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1953. We were all excited as can be. And then on the 12th of January, I get a letter from President Harry Truman welcoming me to the United States Army. I report duty February 12th, 1953, 2 days before the Gleason show. My heart sank. How are we going to, what a blow that is. Yeah. So one of the guys in the band says to me, yeah, don't give up. Let's write a letter, send a letter to the draft board. So we sat down and with help and wrote this out. And my sister was the secretary. She had a government job, so she typed it up for me, and we sent it to the draft board. And it said, told them what was going on. Then I get a reply from the draft board, come on into the office, we want to talk to you. So I had to go over to Norristown, the county seat, and go in, and two well-dressed gentlemen sitting there behind the desk in their suits and ties and stuff. And well, what's the story here? I said, well, sir, this is an opportunity. It's going to be once in a lifetime. This will never happen again. And I said, I really love the band. It's one of the few things I have in life that I can really enjoy. I said, I'm not trying to get out of the service, so all I'm asking for is, I said, I'll report the following Monday. I just would like to be able to make that job. And they said, well, we'll give you a 10-day extension.
Wow. Wonderful.
So they did for the Magic Gleason show.
Tell me about the Jackie Gleason show. What was that like? You guys had to go to New York
Yeah, we
to
had
do to
tour.
record the show. How many of you went? How'd that all work out?
Band. We had the full band there. And we had a small costume. We had our playing card suit. That's I'll send you a picture of that, by the way. We had that costume. That's the same one we have worn for Macy's. We didn't wear the Gleason didn't want the plumes with which we had in the 1953 costume. So we had the card suit, which was better for the stage anyhow. And we got up there and we were rehearsing. And June Taylor, you've heard of the June Taylor dancers?
Mm-hmm.
She was walking through the band. She thought we were fantastic. She walked right by me and says, "You guys are wonderful," and she just couldn't get over it. Ray Block got his violin out. He was playing along with the band as we were rehearsing. He was the director of the musical group they had there. And like I told you earlier, the director had us playing different songs, and we went over about 6 or 8 songs, something like that. He picked them out, and then Jackie Gleason came in. After he had everything set, Gleason, "Hi, you guys, we had a good time." And he got involved. He changed the whole show. So what you heard is what Gleason picked out.
So he picked his favorite songs?
He picked those 4 numbers out that we played. Yeah, When You're Smiling, which was the last number. He came out in his Reggie Van Gleason outfit and did the strut along with Joe Ferko in front of the band. And that to me was the best job. Ferko had a lot of good jobs in my years there, but that was the one that sticks out the most.
Wow, it sounds incredible. And who was the band's musical director at that point? Was that Bill Connors or was it pre-Bill Connors?
Bob Traub.
Bob Traub, okay.
Traub was still in there at that point, yeah.
WCAU-TV, Channel 10, Philadelphia.
The Jackie Gleason Show. Starring Jackie Gleason. And our guest for tonight, Dick King. The Ferko Marching String Band. Art Carney. And brought to you by the new 620 electric shaver that's better built for closer shave. New Ipana, the creamy white toothpaste for fewer cavities, cleaner teeth and breath. And Bengay for fast relief from aches and pains. And away we go. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to turn you over to our... Ladies and gentlemen, a few weeks ago we had 16 banjo players and the June Taylor dancers to do a nostalgic soft shoe, which I hope you remember. And after we did this number, we had so many letters saying that it was nice, that the people enjoyed it, that we decided to do some crazy kind of thing. And I don't know if you know this or not, but I had the pleasure and the honor of being the... what do you call it now? Grand Master of the Thanksgiving Day Parade. And in that parade, for Macy's, they had a string band called Ferko String Band, which is without a doubt one of the greatest. Now, of course, we can't have a parade here in our theater, but we're going to bring the band to you. And honestly, they have been the champions of the Mama's Day Parade in Philadelphia for more years than you can remember or mention. And I think that you're going to get the biggest kick from these people music you ever heard. So hear the music you ever heard.
Were there any other particularly noteworthy concerts or performances that Ferko did over your career, that as long as we're on that topic?
Yeah, we can talk about some of those. We were on a Gary Moore show. I've got a secret. The secret was Joe Ferko's 50 years as captain.
Joe Ferko's band was probably the most famous in the Mummers Parade. I left out one item. Not only is his band famous, but Joe Ferko is the most famous mummer that we know of because he has led a band in the Mummers Parade far longer than anyone else. He has led a band personally every year since 1914, which, including this coming Wednesday, makes 50 consecutive years in all. Miss Ferko, certainly, sir, I would not be rude enough to ask you how old you are, but could you tell me how old you were when you started leading a band in the parade? 18. 50 years ago. Everybody figured? All righty. Well, I understand the Ferko String Band has won more costume prizes than any other in the parade. I think now that we would like to see them perform. They cannot show you this year's uniforms because, by tradition, they must be seen first on New Year's Day. But, gentlemen, if you'll open the curtains, we'll get a little preview of what we're all going to see and hear on New Year's Day. Gentlemen, go.
And we had to go up to New York for that also. And we played a couple of numbers, and it was late in the year, and we wound up finished up playing Auld Lang Syne with the audience singing along with us.
I personally want to urge you to stay tuned to see an exceptionally funny Lucy show tonight. I've previewed it, and it's just marvelous. Now, gentlemen, if you will lead us all in a traditional New Year's song, all together. John, you want to start us out?
My Favorite Martians, Sunday evenings over most of these stations.
But that was a big show.
How did you wind up getting the connection for that job?
I have no idea. Whether they contacted us or whether somebody from Ferko called and spoke to them or wrote to them about the 50-year anniversary of Joe, I can't tell you with that. There was a gentleman by the name of Charles Welsh who wrote a book. It's O' Them Golden Slippers. And
sure. I have that book.
Have the book. Okay, there's I think it's page 113. There's a little interview with Bill Connors on there about the music.
Oh, I'll have to look that up. Yeah, I think I have the new version of it, the one that came out in 1994.
Okay. And there was also some conversations he had with band members in 1958 because he had interviewed Harry Leary, who was president of the band at that time, and Harry Leary mentions about Jackie Gleason dancing and singing with the band during the show rehearsal up there. The other situation with Welsh was he had talked to me a couple of times at the band. The priceless that he has in the back were the information I had given him at that particular time, which was far from being complete.
Yep.
The book came out in 1970. He contacted the band and he wanted to know if we could they were having a big banquet. And he wanted to know if we could send a group of guys down to play. So they turned it over to me to take care of it. And I picked up 10 or 12 guys who went down. And we had the Aladdin costume that particular year, which was a good suit to wear without the back piece, because it was it was just a character suit and you had all the parts without the back piece. But we finished playing, and the gentleman who was working with us there says, "All right, now we're walking out there." He says, "Now every table there's an empty chair, and one guy from the band has to go and sit in each of those empty chairs." And he says to me, "And you're going to put the head table next to Charlie Welsh." They treated us like we were Hollywood stars.
Wow.
Walking out there, the guy said, "Oh, I don't know about this. I don't know. I can deal with it." I said, "Just do your best. Be yourself." And they were all good. Ferko always had good membership. You never had to worry about their character.
Yeah.
And they sat at the table and they had conversations with the people. When we finished, they couldn't stop talking about it. They said, "This is one of the best nights we've ever had."
I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk to you a little bit more about your arranging and how you kind of learned to arrange. I know you started writing some arrangements in the mid 60s, 64. And how did you learn those skills? Did you teach yourself, or did Bill Connors teach you some things, or how?
To arrange a number, I put the basic parts down: the lead, the third, the tenor. And then I always got the sheet music, so I make sure I had the right chords and what have you in there. And because as far as chords go, I knew chord construction, but that was the basic idea of it. Because I used that when I played the bells. It was chord construction. I played with 4 mallets, and I learned that, so I was playing the same thing that the saxes were playing.
I see.
And it made a big difference. And then the baritone part was just a part that I could hear in my head, and I can't explain it. I could be humming a melody and I could hear this other part, this moving part. And that's the thing that I had to be able to write down on paper and make that work.
Bill DeBias, when I spoke with him, he said that you have always had a real gift for finding that sweet spot for the Barry part and really making that Barry sing. He said it's something that he wishes that he were able to do as well as you. And he did mention Honest and Truly as one of his favorite John Gilbert arrangements with the moving Barry part. I'm going to play a little bit of Honest and Truly. Do you have anything to say about Honest and Truly before I play it?
That's the one. He loved that part.
I'm going to play a little bit of Honest and Truly, and then if you have anything to say about it, let me put this up first here. Just a minute, please.
Okay, go ahead.
simple but elegant.
Yeah, yeah. I can't explain it, Jonathan. It's just something it's there, and that's all I can tell you.
And so unique to the Ferko sound, that walking bari part with the 3-part harmony up top and the moving bari in the middle. Ray Malek kind of, I think he said it's almost like taking the place of a trombone, even though a song like that, it doesn't sound anything like a trombone, obviously, but he said it's almost in a trombone range.
Yeah. Yeah, the funny part about it, that record there, when I was playing, that's the last time I played the bells.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It's before the parade passes by.
That's my favorite. That was my favorite one. That and Honest and Truly. Oh, Josephine is right up there too. Bill Connors always thought that Josephine was the best arrangements that I ever made. He liked that one. That's a great
arrangement as well. I don't have it queued up here, but let me see if I can find that really quickly. Hang on a second.
Sleep, Josephine, please don't lean her on the bell. Oh, when you mush it, please don't push her on the bell. I heard Mrs. Carlingo say she called the police. The landlord, he said, he's gonna break the lease. You can squeeze all you please, that's alright. But don't keep us from sleep every night. You can have so much fun with that son of a gun. But Josephina, please don't lean her on the bell. Josephina, please don't lean her on the bell.
Hey, Joe did a heck of a job with that number.
That is a fun one. That's a real fun one. That was recorded when? That was from the... When do you think that was done?
It was done around 63, 64, somewhere like that.
Okay. There's a few renditions of it. There was I think the band's recorded it a couple of times. But good. That's great stuff. That's great stuff. So you were mostly kind of self-taught then with what you were doing, and you just kind of learned by doing, I guess.
It came natural. Like I say, other than the baritone part, the other stuff is pretty basic. Just a basic harmony, and then put the baritone in there, and that was it.
Now you continued writing routines through the 70s. When did you take over as music director at Ferko?
I only did it for 1 year, and it was kind of a temporary thing. We really wanted to get Bill Tobias into that job.
Okay.
But he hadn't been in the band long enough. So I took it for 1 year, from March of 72 to March of 73. And then by then, Bill was eligible, and then he got the job.
So it was basically Ed Wolfe all the way up into 72, 73, and then
right
after that, Bill took over.
Yeah. Let me get back to Bill Connors for a second.
Yeah.
He had a lot of sheet music out in his garage. And every once in a while, he'd come into the club and rehearse. Hey, John, take this home and see what you can do with it. He gave me a piece of sheet music. Honest and Truly was one of those numbers. And there were several of them. And in fact, 2 other numbers we played for the Aladdin suit in 1970 was Somebody's Lonely and Where Are You Dreamgirl? They were sheet music that Bill Connors gave to me to work on. The other 3 numbers we played with that costume, Lucky Day, some Most Unusual Day, and On a Wonderful Day Like Today were numbers that I suggested. But one good thing about Ed Wolfe, when I was drill master, and I was always included in the music selection, he said, here's the numbers we're going to play. You do what you want with them. And he gave me a free hand to work into my program or whatever we were going to do for that presentation. I could do any rotation I wanted. He never interfered with that. He gave me a clear hand about that.
So you were also serving as drill director of Ferko?
Yeah, in fact, for the 53 parade, I was music director, drill master, and music arranger.
Wow.
For 1 year. That was enough.
What year was that?
1953, Latin American rhythms.
Okay. 73, right?
Yeah, Bill did one of the numbers in there, part of the routine. I was getting him ready to move, take over, and so I had him arrange one of the numbers. So.
What you mentioning all of the music that Bill Connors had in his collection reminds me of something that Bill DeBias mentioned to me, that he said the music test at Ferko was a real challenge because those people who couldn't read music and just knew songs by heart, you guys would put something in front of them, and there were so many obscure songs in Ferko's library that nobody had ever heard of before because Bill had such an arsenal of songs, and it would be hard to fake it through a music test at Ferko. So Bill DeBias took over music directing, and then you were still arranging music for a while.
When Bill took over, I stopped arranging music.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I was planning on getting out of being active in the band after 1977 Convention Hall. That was my long-range plan. But I had Bill Spezial as my assistant drill master and Bill DeBias as assistant music director, trying to get them in place to fill those positions when I pulled out. But there were other people in the band who could do it too. Tommy King was there. It was I wasn't going to walk out without somebody being ready to take over.
And how many? So what years were you drill director in Ferko then?
From 1966 through 1976 for the 11 years.
Through 76. Okay.
That's the job I like the best, really. I'll tell you, I had the opportunity of directing concerts, being in front of the band, and there was never a time I didn't have a chill on my spine when I was in that position with that group of guys behind me. They were fantastic.
They were a very well-disciplined group, right?
They always were, and they were always cooperative. You had very, very little trouble with the band. I was there for 29 years, minus 2 when I was in the Army and in Korea. But we never had any real problems whatsoever. Character was part of the screening period when somebody came into the band. And I think the proudest thing I am of what I did with the band was, along with Bill Connors and Eddie Wolfe, when Joe Ferko passed away. And the band, he had all taken care of by a lawyer, that the band would be how it was going to be run after his death. And that transition period, the three of us were determined that band was not, the characters of the band and the quality of the band was not going to go downhill after Joe passed away. And I think we managed to do a pretty good job with it.
You sure did. How did that happen, by the way? Did Joe just sort of pass the ownership to the members at that point, or?
Yeah, it was set up that the band would vote for the captain and a board of directors. There were 12 board of directors. 3 came, it was a 3-year term, and 3 came up every year. So you didn't get a one mass big turnover. Kind of like the United States Senate. You only get 1/3 of them every election. But Joe felt that the captain's position was so important that every man should have a say in that selection. Now, the rest of the officers were voted on by the board of directors. Got on the board of directors in 1965. And I was on up until I gave it up.
So of all the years that you were involved with directing, be it writing music, doing drill, what were some of your 2 or 3 favorites of all?
Oh, the American Heritage 1971. I enjoyed that more than anything else. The bad downside was we picked the first band up the street, #1, and that hurt us tremendously. But I love that.
What did you like so much about it?
I just like the overall theme and the Indian costume. And we did some unusual things other years too, but that was, I don't know, there was just something about that thing that I really liked. And 1966 also was, we got sixth prize. It was the Bengal Lancers. I enjoyed that. That was the year I kind of hated to see come to an end. I guess because of the costume. At that time, I was just a little under 6'1", 195 pounds. And
I've got a picture of you here.
The one with the salute, the British. I love that suit, you know, and I know that was Curtis Sturt. I was Curtis Sturt's first year's captain. Joe had passed away before.
Okay.
That's it, yeah. I really enjoyed that year. We opened up with on the road to Mandalay, and I'm sorry we never made a recording of that. I thought the band did that so well. They were all Billy James arrangements that year. They did it well.
What were some of the other bands that you liked watching or listening to during your era of directing and being involved in leadership? Any other string bands that were particular favorites of yours?
Yeah, well, you know, years ago, each band seemed to have his own style. Like, you knew Herman Seflin with Hegeman. If you could hear them playing a block away, you knew who it was. Quaker City was the same way. Polish American was always tough. They were good. That was our biggest competitor, was Polish American, really. And they had some good streaks there, like from 59 to 64, where they were first and second. And but they were just good, strong competition. And of course, there's Herbie Smith, and when he came onto the picture, the bar went up. Everybody had to crank themselves up to do something better, because Herbie was outstanding and a heck of a nice person also.
Heck of a nice person.
I respect for Herbie Smith.
Tell me about Hegeman's sound. You say that Hegeman had a very distinctive sound. How would you describe their sound?
Well, we used to say that Herman Seflin, his music was railroad track harmony, you know, and you know, if one sax was moving up a note, so was the third, so was the tenor. You know, they were, and that's how we used to refer to it. But he had a distinctive sound, and it was good. There was no question about it. They were a competitive band. He was very good. You know, Herm Seflin, Bill Connors, and a guy from South Philadelphia that I can never remember his name, and one other guy. Those four guys all started out with the Myers String Band back in the 1930s. There's four music directors that left, you know, that band, they disbanded. Well, they didn't disband, they merged with Hegeman in 1941. And there was four music directors come out of that band. So they had to have some talent down there.
Wow.
But this poor guy from South Philadelphia really turned that band around.
Ferko did a lot of recording over the years, studio recording. Can you tell me a little bit about some of those recording sessions? I know there were a lot of recording sessions with Len Rosen. Can you tell me what you know about Len and Shore Records and how all that stuff came about?
All right, why don't we start with Palda, the first one's the 78s. Practically all recorded in the WWII studio in Philadelphia. There were a few records that were done elsewhere, and you can tell the difference, but the WWII studios were by far the best. The other CD that I sent you was set to 45 RPMs. They were all recorded up in New York. And they were not done with the full band. Bill Connors was music director, and he picked out who he wanted to go up there because the studios weren't big enough to hold the entire band anyhow. So he had to cut back on it. So we carpooled it up there. And they
did you play on, just to back up for a minute, did you play on any of the 78 RPM recordings, or was that before you had joined the band?
No, I played on most of them. Not myself. Sometimes Bunky and I were both there, or he would be there and I wouldn't, or vice versa. But I played on a good many of those. Wow. The funny thing about that, we were up in, Bunky was a cab driver for the Yellow Cab Company in Philadelphia. And he mostly worked weekends, and he didn't like to take off weekends because I think he got big tips, for passengers. And we were going up, we went up to New York, and we were going to record a Christmas song. And it was a medley of Santa Claus is Coming to Town and Jingle Bells. And Bob had an 8-note lead-in on the bells before the band came in. We were going to record the number, and the officers were up there talking amongst themselves, and they didn't know what to do because Bunky wasn't there. I was only there, and I'd only been in the band a matter of maybe 7 or 8 months, something like that. And they didn't know what to do. And finally, the guys in the band said, what's the trouble, And one guy, a guitar player who was belonged to the musicians union, says, let the kid play it. He can do it. So they said, all right, John, you do it. Went all perfectly the first time around. Nobody ever questioned me after that. The following year, we went back and did 2 more Christmas numbers, and I had a solo and an introduction on one and a solo on the other. Things that turned around in a year's time.
So the 45 RPMs, they were recorded, what period of time?
In 56, 57, 58. Alabama Jubilee, I guess you know that story. That got up as high as number 14 on the charts in the mid-1955.
Wow. And we also had You Are My Sunshine, which is also on that
CD I sent you, that was like 34th or something. We had an amateur band with 2 songs in the top 50 in the country.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah, Alabama Jubilee just took off. The kids even danced to it in bandstand in Philadelphia, Dick Clark's program.
Now, was Alabama Jubilee as popular a song before that in Mummery, before that 45 RPM came out, or was it that 45 that made Alabama Jubilee such a popular Mummers song?
That's the thing that made it popular. Yeah, that was the one. And the funny part of it was that was a Quaker City's theme in the year before on Broad Street. That was their theme, Alabama Jubilee, and they played that number. We picked it up on them, and it just exploded.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Biggest seller on the, just to back up on it, the biggest seller on the 70 RPM was Heartbreaker. The business manager got a letter from somebody from Australia a few years ago, and said his father loved the song Heartbreaker. And he said he used to go to the bar and drink, and they have him always playing Heartbreaker, and he wanted to know if we could send him a copy of the record. So we arranged it out between the business manager and myself, and he got a copy sent over to him.
Wow. I have to say Heartbreaker was one of my favorites on the list of 78s that you included on the CD you sent me. That was one of my favorites as well.
That is actually the second recording of Heartbreaker. The first one was recorded probably late October and early November, but the flip side of it was this Christmas medley I was telling you about. And then Dave Miller, who was the owner of the Palda Recording, didn't realize that Heartbreaker was going to take off, so he had to have us redo it. And I think he had the band in December 22nd of 1948 to get into the Heartbreaker sales, because they were going to buy Heartbreaker with Christmas medley on the flip side. So he had us redo it, and it was the best seller in the 70s.
Wow. So what kind of recordings happened after the 45 RPM recordings?
That's when we got in with Lenny Rosen. Lenny started out with Aqua. Aqua had made a few records for him, and he got us in there. And I never had any trouble with Lenny. Some of the studios we went into weren't the greatest, but
who was he as a was he owned the studio, or was he just
he owned a record company?
Okay.
And the last studio that I saw with him was at Westchester University. And that wasn't, I was arranging for another band at that time. After I had left Ferko, I didn't go anywhere else to play, but 2 bands hired me to arrange their music. Uptown did, and I did them for about 11 years, and Hegeman.
Oh, okay.
Herman Seflin was getting up in years, and he wanted somebody else to do the arrangement.
So what years did you write Uptown?
From 77 to 84. And I did Hegeman from 80 to 83. Hegeman had won 20th prize in 1979, and they were really, their captain, Tom Hawley, had been with Ferko for a few years, and I knew Tom. And even though I was doing music for Uptown, Hegeman called me and asked me if I would do the music for them. So I did, and both bands were good to work with. In fact, whenever I went down to visit, they always had me direct the band. So Hegeman had a theme of famous American composers, and I really think I enjoyed doing that arrangement as much as anything I did with Ferko. It was just the numbers they had picked out for that thing, and I just enjoyed it. Well, they did well. They jumped up to 8th.
Wow.
Then the next year, I said, why don't you take out a George M. Cohen theme? And I said, here's the what you can do with it, and we had a pit band involved. And they said, okay. They took it, they got the theme, and the music director says to me, do whatever you want with it. So I put the music together, and they were happy with it. And then I get a phone call from John Pignotti, who wasn't the music director at that time, but he had been before. He said, we got a problem. He said, we like what you want us to do, but the drill master wants something different. We want to have a meeting, could you come down? Oh boy, this, when am I going to get into the middle of this thing? So I went down, and we discussed it, and we were going back and forth, and the drill master kept saying to me, he said, but you want to open up with a pit band coming out of from behind the big costume. He said, you're playing your trump card right off the bat. But I said, Joe, what are you going to do with that big band before you bring the pit band out? I said, that big band is nothing but a background curtain. So we were going over different aspects of it for about an hour. Finally, he said, all right. He says, John, he said, out of respect for what you did with Ferko, I'll do it your way. But he says, I think it's wrong. So they did it, and I went down the Broad and Shunk to see them off. And I went over, and the first guy that sees me is Joe Boulders. So, John, we just finished our show, and he said, I see exactly what you're talking about. You did the right thing. He said, you were right. They finished second, half a point from first, and they were told to no end, but they did a good job with it. And Joe Boulders, he played the part of George M. Cohen, and he did a fantastic job out there.
So I want to go back to some of the Lenny Rosen recordings. So you started working with Lenny. He did some work with Aqua, and you guys then started doing some recording as well.
Yeah, we did a lot of. We did 7 LPs with Lenny. I was on a good relations with Lenny. In fact, he had my phone number at work. If you ever had any questions or anything, you could feel free to call me.
How would the recording sessions for when the New Year's routines recorded be done? Those recordings were done in the fall before the parade, correct?
Yes. Yeah, the New Year's themes were all done prior. That's why some of them are not as sharp as they should have been, but they probably didn't have time to do it. The funny part of it is, I think the best one we did was the American Heritage. And I was under the gun on that. We only had one rehearsal before that recording session. That's one of the best ones we ever came up with. The other thing, in 1970, Aladdin's Lucky Day, was something happened that year that I never saw happen before, and I don't know that it ever happened after. That's the first year that Ferko had 3 baritone saxophones. And the 3 of the numbers I did, I mentioned to you that Bill Connors had given me, that I had the other 3. And for some reason, the baritone parts just flowed when I was bringing those numbers. And they really came out great. We finished 5th prize. Have you ever been out to the show?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so the main quarter after that was a big.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
We went out and into that corridor. We just had our band trousers on and our white shoes and our street shirts. We went out there and we went over our routine. And that corridor filled up with people like you couldn't move. You could not move. And those baritone parts that year were just something I could never match afterwards. Those people came out that night and filled up that room. So we went out the second night to go, well, I wonder if anybody would come out. it was the same thing for all 7 shows. And I never saw that before. There was something about the sound of that year, and that's the Aladdin's Lucky Day. And it was unbelievable.
Speaking of the show of shows, when did the show of shows actually start?
I think 37 was the first year. I'm not sure.
And when did the concept of the top 4 bands being in the back room start? Do you know?
1955. Now, the first year for the ramp was 1957. We used to come out through the side doors. The first time I was there was 1945. They actually came off the stage, and they had two or three steps to go down off the stage. Their music just fell apart while they were going down the steps. And then they went from there.
And what in 1955 made the back room with the top 4 kind of start? Was there anything that kind of catalyzed that?
I think it's just the fact that there were several bands. They weren't the top bands, and they were the bands with the small costumes. Ferko was in there with the Student Prince, and Durning was in there, and one of those rooms. It was a small costume. And then they decided to put the first 4 prizes in there. So the guy said, I don't care whether we go first or not, just so we can get the side room and convention hall.
So it started out, it was just a side room because of small costumes, but at some point in time around 1955, it started becoming for the top 4 bands.
Started the year after that, the top prize bands would go into the side rooms.
And is it true that Ferko didn't generally parade down the center aisle, except for maybe once in the show of shows back in the day, or is that not true?
No, we didn't used to do that. We used to go into through the side room and come out single file, like we had some discipline, and line up that way. The show of shows, that's where I always try to come up with something different. And in 1972, with the band's 50th anniversary, we took a third of the band down the ramp first, and we had trying to recreate the 1923 sound, which was almost impossible to do because we didn't have banjo mandolins and things like that. This second 2/3 came down as a 1947 band. That was the 25th anniversary. Then we all played together as the current band. And we were, even on the rehearsal floor, there were guys trying to convince me not to take that 23 band down by that way. They said, that sounds terrible. I said, well, look, I'm going down with a 23 band. So I think we're going to be okay. You know, we got about halfway down that ramp, and the applause just blew up from the spectators. It was something different. Every band comes charging down the ramp, and here comes this tinky tink tink band down. and the people went crazy.
Yeah.
The 7 band came down, and I tried to create Bob Traub's arrangement as best I could, and they came down playing that, and it went over well.
That's such a clever idea. What song were you playing? What song were you playing?
We played All by Myself, and then the other 47 band played Whispering.
The top of the day. This is Phil Sheridan welcoming you to the magnificent sound of the world-renowned Ferko String Band. On January 1st, 1972, the Ferko String Band celebrated their 50th anniversary. The band was organized in 1922 by its first captain, the late Joseph A. Ferko, and has compiled the very enviable record of having finished among the first 5 prize winners in 47 of those 50 years of competition. Now, string bands have made a great transition since the Ferko Band first paraded up Philadelphia's Broad Street in 1923. In those days, the bands consisted mostly of stringed instruments with a few saxophones and accordions. The Ferko Band would like to take you back to 1923, and although we can't show you what the band looked like at that time, we can give you some idea of how they sounded. Let's go back to 1923 as the band plays Irving Berlin's All by Myself. As the years passed, the Ferko Band realized the importance of the saxophone in a string band. Their number increased until they made up about 1/4 of the band, and they also began to play in harmony. This blend of saxophone harmony along with the stringed accompaniment created a very unique and lilting sound. In the early 1940s, the addition of the string bass played a very vital role. Let's listen now to the sound of Ferko in 1947 as they celebrated their 25th anniversary, playing one of the favorite string band tunes of that time, Whispering. Having become the leading musical string band, the men of Ferko did not rest on their laurels. They continued to improve their sound. With the sweetness of the alto saxophone, they added the tenor sax to carry the middle range, and the baritone saxophone and string bass to carry the bass range. This, along with retaining portions of the original string band instrumentation, such as violins, guitars, and banjos, has created today's sound of this world-renowned string band. Now, listen to the Ferko sound of today.
In fact, we were going to approach the judges playing Smile Away Each Rainy Day until Bill came in with You Always Hurt the One You Love, and that changed that thing right then. And the Bill, that's the number we're playing, approaching the starting line.
John, I know you retired from your role in Ferko around 1977, you said, and then you were writing for some other bands, Uptown and Hegeman, you mentioned. What happened after you retired from Ferko and the other things? What did you wind up doing with your time? And did you have Mummer involvement at that point, besides the two bands you were writing for?
No, that was it. That was just took of my New Year's time. We have two sons, and they were getting to an age where Little League baseball and scouts, and I wanted more time with my family. I left early, a year early, because the band got upset with the 13th prize in '76. And we knew we were going to get hammered because there was some bad publicity, and they wanted a change. And so the officers still had me in as drill master, and I stayed till around June, but I could see that they weren't happy. And for one more year, which I was going to bow out anyhow, I just, for the good of the band, that was the most important thing to me. And so I tendered my resignation. I went out, I wrote a nice letter. I had no hard feelings, and I kept in contact with other band members, and no animosity whatsoever. And I had a great time there, and they bounced back, and that's what I wanted them to do. And I knew they could do it. There was no question in my mind. I had Bill Spezio and Tommy King for co-drill masters. They had a good music director, and I knew they would do well. And it was still my band, and it will be till my dying day. So
John, tell me what you're up to these days. What do you occupy your time with?
I like sports, baseball, football, and do that. I work around the house. I do what I can. I'm to the point where I can't do much anymore. I'll be 89 next week. And,
oh, wow. Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I just can't do too much anymore.
You playing music at all?
I play keyboard. That's what I arrange on. I fool around with that a little bit, but not too much. If you can see this.
Oh, yeah.
That's the blue and the gray.
Oh, yeah.
That was the best year. We suspected this was going to be something that we would remember for years. And the secretary of the band had these silk screen plaques made up.
Oh, how wonderful. Oh, that's wonderful.
Can I share one more highlight with you?
Please.
We played down at the Tobacco Festival in Richmond, Virginia, starting in 1950, and they were still going down there after I left the band. And I think it was the first or second year I was drill master that this happened. We always went to a children's hospital in Richmond. They always had a grand marshal at the parade, and they had some big time celebrities down there. And this particular time, they had Hogan's heroes. Hogan, Sergeant Schultz, and Colonel Klink were all there.
Oh, wow.
Car was parked off to the side where we were lining up. And I'm out front trying to get people lined up. And Bob Crane, Hogan, goes over to me and says, if I had a drum, I'd play along with you. To a drum. So I had Bunky was in the back with the drum. And he was a bell player, but he was really a drummer. And he couldn't carry the bells anymore, so he went to the drum. So he brings his drum up and gives it to Bob Crane. Bob Crane straps it on. He's off to my right. And we marched down the driveway. Bob Crane over there. He's having a great time. Yeah.
Wow.
And we get to the end, and where the kids were, he comes over to me and he says, nice working with you, John.
Wow.
But I found out later that Bob Crane played for the Connecticut Symphony Orchestra.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No kidding.
But they were, of all the celebrities we ran into over those years, those three guys were the nicest. They were the nicest with the people around, in this case, the children. And that was a real high. one of the highlights of my career.
Sure sounds it. Yeah. How wonderful.
Bob Crane, and he was fantastic.
Well, you know what I want to say? You're fantastic, and you're really an amazing guy. I sure am amazed at your career and all that you've accomplished and all of the wonderful things that you've brought to this world of mummery that we all love. And I just really want to thank you for all of your contributions, and also thank you for sharing these amazing stories. I think you've taught so many people so many things that were not previously known, or certainly not known by the majority. I certainly didn't realize that Alabama Jubilee was something that came around as a result of the 45 RPM on the Ferko recording. And I have to give a shout out to Anthony Salenza for connecting us, because if it wasn't for Anthony, we wouldn't have had the technical wherewithal to get this interview together for today. So Anthony, thank you. I know you're there in the background. John, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really am just so honored and have learned so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with John Gilbert. I sure did enjoy talking with him, and I hope you learned a few things. I certainly learned a lot. For those of you who are interested, stick around after these comments, and I have included a list of all of John's arrangements that he's written. They're all listed by name and by date. It's a really comprehensive list. As always, please reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions. I'd really love to hear from you.
Really awesome. I can't believe all the stuff that you, I can't believe all the wonderful things all the wonderful stories you were able to tell me. I mean, Anthony warned me. He said, John is going to have a lot of stories. He's going to have some history, and he was not kidding. You are just a wealth of information.
Okay.
You've only scratched the surface.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine.